It is 4 o'clock, it's time to rock and roll. My name is Joshua Gilliland, I'm one of the founding attorneys of the Legal Geeks. Thank you all for joining us for YAR, the Pirates of Star Wars. Hey. With me today for this grand voyage, to my left is Stephen Tollafield.
Hello.
Judge Carol Najera and Katrina Wraight. And everyone's a lawyer except for Judge Najera, who's a judge. And we're going to have a lot of fun. We're all lifelong Star Wars fans. We all are into this. And we have a question that's been up on who owns the Onyx Cinder. We're going to be coming back to that and discuss those legal issues. So let's begin. First off, what is piracy? Star Wars has a rich history with pirates. The animated series all have pirates in them. Live action mentions pirates a lot as well. So what is it legally? Well, that means let's talk about case law. So we have piracy defined both in our code, but it then references international law and treaties in order to get to the full definition. So whoever on the high seas commits the crime of piracy as defined by the law of nations, okay, what's the law of nations? So let's take a look at, let's break this down. We have to understand what the high seas are and what the law of nations are in order to get our definition. High seas are defined as open waters of sea or ocean as distinguished from ports and havens and waters within narrow headlands on the coast. So on the Great Lakes, yeah, it's an inland ocean, but there aren't pirates on the Great Lakes. They're criminals if that happened. Then the Convention of the High Seas states that piracy includes, and this is a mouthful, any illegal act of violence, detention, or any act of deprivation committed for private ends by the crew or passengers of a private ship or private aircraft and directed. Okay, we now have a working definition. When has this come into play? Fun fact, we have an ancient doctrine in the United States. It's called, "Don't touch our boats." We will come after you. We started with a 6-ship navy and decided we'll take on the British Empire that has 800. That's how we roll. And you had the Barbary pirates in the Mediterranean in the early 19th century and during the Peffer administration trying to extract tribute from American shipping. Jefferson asked for a force bill or an authorization to use force to go after and clean house. So when you hear the Marine Corps hymn that says from the Halls of Montezuma to the shores of Tripoli, that's where this comes from. So we have in 1802 a force bill passed by Congress where we say we're taking out the pirates. And it authorizes American military ships to go out and engage pirates and to go out and capture them. We've only declared war a handful of times. This is our first time with a force bill. We enact them multiple other times throughout our history. And so, we had one to eliminate the Ku Klux Klan. We've had them for every non-war out there. The Tonkin Gulf Resolution, going into Iraq, all of those were authorized by Congress. This is the first time Congress does that. And it's Jefferson, which people don't expect. The guy who was against the Navy, and then afterwards tells President Adams, hey, you were right to build up the Navy that I used. Well, how do we compare this to Star Wars and the New Republic? Because we see the New Republic have a really weird track record with pirates. So in Mandalorian Season 3, we have the pirate siege of Navarro, where pirates go in and they take over the town on the planet. And you have our heroes going out saying hey, we need an authorization to go out and fight the pirates on Navarro. And the Republic says no. Now it's middle management. And you have an Imperial Remnant officer just hanging out giving bad life advice. And that's why we have the New Republic not engage pirates in the water. On the flip side, with Atten, it's we will send planes within 2 flaps. I'm sure it had nothing to do with a mint being on the planet. I mean, it's like saying, you know what, that's where the oil is. So yeah, we will send force to go protect the oil fields. And if you have a plan full of money, it's a good bet. People are going to defend that very quickly with no questions asked. So let's talk about the Onyx Cinder. So this is audience interaction time, and Stephen's going to help us understand the law with, you have a crashed spaceship. Stephen.
Yeah, so if you have a moment, if you haven't already done so, you can participate in our little QR code quiz to see who the popular recipient of the Onyx Cinder would be. When we were doing our podcast on the Skeleton Crew, which we all loved, it was so great, we were really wrestling with this throughout the series because it was really unclear from the get-go who owned it. Like, where did it come from? How did it wind up on Atten? Who did it belong to? So we kind of revisited this question throughout the podcast series. So now it's at the end of the show. Who should it go to rightfully? And there are some interesting little twists and turns in this legal question. Let's see how the poll is coming out here. Okay, so it looks like Tacronod and SM33 are getting quite a few votes. 19.4% of you say SM33, and about 15% people say Tacronod. Great response. However, generally, they're thieves, unfortunately. And generally, in our legal system, there isn't a way for stolen property to... Is that better? Can you hear me? Okay, great. Thank you. It's generally not possible for stolen property to ripen into a valid title or ownership right. So generally, we wouldn't think of SM33 and Tacronod as being rightful heirs of the Onyx Cinder. Let's see, about 14% think of Whim as being the valid owner because, after all, he called claims he's on the new ship. That seems like a really valid way of acquiring property. And also Fern, KB, Neil, and Whim as a joint venture, that got about 23, 24. So they're actually kind of the front runners. Good point. Like, those are actually really good instincts because in our legal system, we have a thing called the law of fines, which basically means finders keepers. If someone has abandoned property, then whoever finds it can take it and just acquire a valid ownership interest in the abandoned property. However, unfortunately, here on the slide we see that there's a statute, a federal statute that Congress enacted in 1987 called the Abandoned Shipwreck Act. And Section 2106A of that statute says that actually law of fines doesn't apply to abandoned ships. It's one of those exceptions where the statute overrules the common law. So unfortunately, claimsies does not apply to abandoned ships. So that leaves the local Atten government, and about 12% of folks thought that would be a good recipient of the Onyx Cinder, and that is also very prescient because under the Abandoned Shipwreck Act, any ship that is sunken off the coast of the United States actually belongs to the federal government, but then the statute operates to transfer title to that shipwreck directly to the state in which the ship rests. So the local government, the analog being kind of Atten, would be a very tempting response under their federal statute. However, unfortunately, this is the Abandoned Shipwreck Act. So in order for this statute to apply, the shipwreck has to actually be abandoned. And as Josh pointed out, you don't touch our ships. The federal government never abandons its property. And so even if a ship is sunk and is not recoverable, we assume, it's a well-settled principle in our jurisprudence, that the United States never abandons any shipwreck. So a ship of the United States would not be covered by this statute. So the answer is probably that since this is a New Republic ship, as we learned in kind of the last couple of episodes, the the Republic would never have stopped looking for it. And so it's not abandoned. And so the answer is probably that the New Republic would assert a valid claim of ownership and adopt it into its navy. So that's kind of a boring answer because who doesn't want the kids to get it? But because that's the best. But unfortunately, this probably belongs to the New Republic. But thank you for participating. Those are really good answers and really good instincts. Like the law of fines, finders keepers, really is very tempting.
Thank you, Stephen. Judge Najera, let's talk about the time that Hondo tried to kill a bunch of kids.
Okay, sure. Actually, in Star Wars: The Clone Wars, there's a 4-episode arc. It's The Gathering, A Test of Strength, Bound for Rescue, and A Necessary Bond. And in my opinion, it very much resembles a Disney movie, but not the Disney movie on the right with Captain Jack Sparrow. It's much more like the one on the far left. It is a story of a child leader who takes a group of children on a wonderful adventure to a distant place in search of a treasure. Sound familiar? Now, in this story, our Padwantano, our Peter Pan, takes her group of pseudo-lost boys, which are the younglings, to the crystal caves to find Kyber crystals for their lightsabers. Along the way, with them, they have their little Wendy character, Huyang. Hondo Ohnaka is the villainous pirate in the middle. And as you can see, he is doing his best Captain Hook imitation. They even have the same stance. Next. So what do these stories have in common with regards to our pirates? Well, both of them have villains who are pirates. So let's go back to what we've already discussed and our original question. What is piracy? Because I can sit here and say they are pirates, but I better be able to back that up. Well, the first thing that I looked at, in addition to what Josh has already told us about, is what I call the U.S. version of the Code of Hammurabi, which is our United States Constitution. Specifically, Article 1, Section 8, Clause 10, is also known as the Define and Punish Clause. It grants Congress the power to define and punish piracies committed on the high seas, or in this case, the vast expanse of space. Historically, the Constitution was referring to high crimes committed on the high seas outside the jurisdiction of a state or country. This is why, as Josh says, you can't have piracy in a lake because there's a jurisdiction there. It's got to be out in the high seas or out in the vast expanse of space where there is no jurisdiction. That's key. Revisiting 18 U.S.C. 1651, which Josh already told us, discusses how piracy is under the law of nations. Hondo is smuggling, kidnapping for ransom, looting, robbing. These are all crimes defined by the laws of nations and committed outside the jurisdiction of any recognized government. Therefore, under 1651 and the understanding of the Constitution, he is a pirate. Now, 18 U.S.C. 1652, 53, and 54 are tricky because they deal with pirates that are acting on behalf of some government or are being outfitted and given supplies by another government or a private entity. This is getting into the realm of privateers. Now, let's think. This doesn't really apply to Hondo because, and this is what makes him a pure pirate, he doesn't care what government you belong to. He doesn't care what side you're on. You can be Count Dooku or you can be Obi-Wan. He'll capture you both just as fast and put you in the same cell. And in fact, he did. Next. So what does this mean to the Ohnaka gang? Well, as I put down there, it means our flags mean death. What do you mean by that? 18 U.S.C. 1111 talks about if murder is committed during a robbery, you're looking at death, especially if you're a pirate. Now, 18 U.S.C. 2111 defines robbery as using force or violence or intimidation to take or attempt to take from the person or presence of another anything of value. And in this case, Hondo was trying to take from the children, from the younglings, the Kyber crystals. Now, what's his intention? Does he intend to kill anybody? Well, let's think about what he says. He has a group of children basically trapped in an air vent, hiding. He knows they're there. He tells his minions to throw in these destructive devices. Even one of his crew are like, wait a minute, there are children in there, they could be killed. And his response is to look at him and say, well, then there'll be no witnesses. This is classically what they were talking about in 18 USC 111. So where does this all leave us? It leaves us that Hondo Ohnaka is a pirate. And not all pirates are lovable, incompetent villains like Captain Jack and Captain Hook. In the Star Wars universe, some of them are irredeemable and should be executed. Not rebranded as lovable good guys in a ride in the park across the street. I'm calling out Smuggler's Run on this one.
But it highlights that Star Wars is really big into redemption. I'll name my new ship after the kid. Everything will be forgiven.
Mere details. Mere details.
Let's talk about smuggling puffer pigs. So, Star Wars Rebels has a lot of pirates and has a lot of Hondo, who again just made a lot of life choices that are for the best. And we get to see Lando Calrissian trying to smuggle puffer pigs in order to go do mining, because they have a really good nose and can go smuggle or go find rare earth minerals. So what's this mean? Is using the ghost to go through an imperial blockade to deliver a puffer pig, is that piracy? I'm going to go and say no. And here's why. A pirate can be a smuggler. A smuggler isn't necessarily a pirate. Two different crimes. Now, you have a lot of pirates who diversify their interests and have different services that they offer, whether it's transporting people from point A to point B, maybe taking puffer pigs places. However, the act of trying to take a single puffer pig for delivering for the service is not piracy. It's definitely smuggling and a touch of blockade running. But it is fascinating because again we get to hear Billy D. Williams play Lando again, and it was the first time he had done so since Return of the Jedi. So Katrina, let's talk about Skull Ridge Mountain in Skeleton Crew.
Let us. So what we know about Captain Renaud's secret pirate lair is that it's deep in the heart of the mountain, and all who enter face ruin or slaughter. So the question here is, what property are we talking about? And in the law, there's a distinction between personal property and real property. So we'll start with the personal property, which is like the stuff, the movable, tangible objects that are not real estate or the land. So personal items can be lost, mislaid, or abandoned, which is what we're talking about here. I think it's been mentioned previously as well. And something that is abandoned, if it is found in a place the owner intended to leave it, but it is in such a condition that it's apparent that he has no intention of returning to claim it. So for this, we can talk about the actual coins and the treasure that is in the lair itself. So we're going back to finders keepers again, because why not? And that's the theory we were talking about, where it becomes the property of whoever finds it. But in this context, there's a theory, a legal theory that we pretty much only get to talk about in law school, so I'm very excited to get to talk about today. And that is treasure trove. And that's coins or currency that are deliberately hidden by the owner sufficiently long ago that the owner can be considered dead or no longer discoverable. So as you can probably imagine, this began with the English common law, where the crown was taking everything that was not theirs and making it their own. And that became the way in American common law too. And in a good number of states, the treasure trove belongs to the finder unless the original owner reclaims it. So that's still applicable. However, in a good number of places, states are trying not to encourage trespass, which obviously that does, so that they discourage the treasure trove. I want to give you guys a little bit of practical law in that there is a specific statute, a federal statute, called the Revised Uniform Unclaimed Property Act that went around in 2016 that gives each state an unclaimed property fund where proceeds from abandoned bank accounts, unpresented checks are turned over to the state after a specific period of time. So you guys should all go to Google you should type in your state name, and you should type in unclaimed property and find out where that fund is and see if there's any money sitting there for you. I can see in the crowd that some people have found it. So take a look later, Google your state and unclaimed property, and you'll see that state fund and see if there's anything missing for you. The other type of property is the real property. So real property is the stuff like the actual land, the real estate, that cannot be abandoned like the personal property can. And the question here is whether Captain Renaud held title to the property. So for real property, the true owner is the guy whose name is on the deed, and that's what it comes down to. But this is kind of a strange situation in that we're talking about like the subterranean land, right? Inherently, that is also owned by the owner of the land above it. That has some current context and relevance in that there's that lady on TikTok who's digging below her land. You guys have seen that too. That's because she owns that, because you generally own the land below your property. Is there certain rules and restrictions to make sure that there's safety involved, of course. But yeah, the ownership of real property extends downward from the surface of your property, and technically in theory all the way to the center of the earth. So with real property, whose it belongs to? First, is his name on the deed? If so, yes. Then he dies. Does he have a will? If he died with a will, then he dies what's called in probate, and the property is distributed according to the terms of the will. And you can pretty much put whatever you want in there to a certain degree. Something that's interesting in this context is there's a specific area of concern in probate called probate piracy, which is the involuntary redistribution of assets, like property poaching. And certain people are even equating it to RICO, and that it's specific enterprises that go out and defraud old people for their trusts and their property before it gets handed off. So that's an interesting consideration, that you can raid a trust and hide the assets and leave the beneficiaries left in the dark. If you died without a will, then you die intestate, and then the property is distributed per the laws of the state, which determines who the heirs are and what percentage they get and the proportions of that property. The only other thing that might come into play here is adverse possession, which people generally love to hear about, which we refer to as squatter's rights, which a trespasser in physical possession of the land owned by someone else can come to hold the title if they just kind of hang out there and don't leave. The specific elements for that is it has to be actual possession, and you have to physically be there and somehow demonstrate that. So if you put up a fence or improvements or whatever it might be, something that puts the original owner on notice that you're trespassing and kind of taking ownership of that land. The possession has to be hostile, and this doesn't mean unfriendly. It just means you can't be given permission, such that like a tenant has permission to be there, right? So they will not be there hostily. It has to be open and notorious, and that it has to be obvious, again, giving the owner right that notice that you are trespassing. It has to be continuing, so you have to be there for a certain amount of time. In California, I think it's 5 years, so not that long. And then exclusive, not shared. And this kind of comes up, the main context this comes at in reality is when some guy thinks his property is a little bit over, a little bit farther than it actually is, and they put up a fence. If that fence is long enough there, it's obvious, it's exclusive, then you actually get that additional piece of land added to your property because of adverse possession.
Thank you. Judge Najera, let's talk about Star Wars Resistance, which has lots of pirates.
Okay. The Star Wars Resistance presents a new breed, I like to say, of pirate. To put it in context, Hondo Ohnaka was active, and listen carefully, during the period when the Republic was in the government and the separatist movement was on. Then we had the Resistance, we had the Battle of Endor, and then we had the New Republic. And their resistance, the First Republic, and their resistance, I never had it right the first time, the New Republic and their resistance, the First Order. Said it's kind of a complicated history. So, but keep in mind, and the reason I explain that is because there are many, many decades between the Hondo Ohnaka and his gang and Kragan Gore and his gang. This is, and I'm going to use Josh's example, kind of like the Barbary pirates, comparing them to the pirates of Somalia. The difference really being that our previous pirates only cared about property. They didn't care which side they were on. And this is going to change a little. We're going to see a little tweaking of all of that. Krieger Gore and his gang are targeting the Colossus base refueling station on Castellon to help the First Order take it over from the New Republic. So this is interfering with the government. In that context, we have to look at this as not just pirates, but privateers and terrorists to determine what our villains are. And in this case, our villains are Krieger Gore and his gang and the First Order. So let's see. We have to look a little bit more at international definitions of pirates. The United Nations Convention on the Law of the Sea defines piracy as illegal acts of violence, detention, or deprivation committed on the high seas for private ends. The historical context and legal framework for punishing piracy acts are rooted in the need to protect maritime commerce and ensure the safety of the high seas, or in our case, the vast expanse of space. So, let's skip 1652 for a moment, that we already talked about, 18 U.S.C. 1652, and let's talk about 1653, which is interesting because it's a heading that starts aliens as pirates, but not this kind of aliens. But it actually is aliens as pirates. In that particular statute, a pirate who is a citizen of one state attacks another state, and the state it attacks has a treaty with the state that the pirate is a citizen of. They're looking at life. Now, when we put this definition into the mix, as well as the previous 1651 we talked about, and what is Krieger Gore? Well, Krieger Gore is a Quoron. He is attacking the Colossus base on Castellon. Castellon's a separate state. Now the question is, and I'll be honest with you, I actually Googled this and looked, there are no treaties between Quoron and Castellon. So under 1653, he is not defined as a pirate, but he is under 1651, and more importantly, under UNCLOS, the United Nations Convention of the Law of the Sea. So, we now know Krieger Gore is a pirate, but is that all he is? Going back to 18 U.S.C. 1654, that defines what a privateer is. What is a privateer? It is a person who fits out and arms, or attempts to fit out and arm, or is concerned with furnishing, fitting out, or arming any private vessel of war, with the intent that such vessel be employed to cruise or commit hostilities upon the other government. One of the goals is to interfere with the policy of that government. Now, Krieger Gore is a privateer under this. Remember, at one point he is discussing open and notoriously the fact that he expects a financial gain from the First Order. He explained clearly that it is expensive to outfit and arm his crew, pay them, keep them going, the weapons, all of that. And he's whining and complaining to the First Order, and the First Order is assuring him that they'll take care of all of this. He is now acting as a privateer. But the inquiry doesn't end there, because now let's look at the third of our little grouping, the terrorists. And while piracy itself is not terrorism, there are connections. Going back to the Somali pirates who basically were funded by ISIS, there was an overlap there, where individuals were involved with piracy, but also engaging in supporting terrorist activities. Now, the Somali pirates were prosecuted for piracy under all of this, but not terrorism. Sounds familiar? And if anyone wants the sites for any of these cases, I'll tell you afterwards. I don't want to put them all up there because I'm on a strict schedule here. But this was exactly what the relationship was between Krieger Gore and the First Order. Now, talking a little bit more about this, next. Krieger Gore is a pirate, a privateer, but not a terrorist. But let's look at the First Order. The First Order is outfitting a ship, a warship, to go against another government to affect their policy. In this case, they are commissioning Krieger and his gang to go to the Colossus station and kidnap Terradoza so that they can force her father to come in and change the policy and allow the First Order to come in and be an active presence there. This is clearly interfering with the policy of that government. The First Order are, under this definition, terrorists. Not Krieger, but the First Order. Krieger is a pirate and a privateer. He's really only in it for the money. He really doesn't have a governmental policy view on all of this. Kind of like think Die Hard. Everyone thought they were terrorists, but they weren't terrorists. They were in it for the money. So that's what we have.
Thank you, Your Honor. Stephen, let's talk about defending yourself with a shanty.
Oh, I know, the famous shanty defense. Yeah, so obviously we're Legal Geeks. Mm-hmm. We are at the height of our Legal Geeks powers when Star Wars shows a trial on screen. And so like with Andor and Ahsoka, and now with a trial of Jod under the Pirate Code, we were like, yes. And also there was an appeal involved, and I'm a former appellate practitioner, and so I was like, oh my God, this is the best. So I have thoughts, so bear with me. So first off, a couple comments just about his trial was a criminal proceeding, obviously, because there was a punishment involved. He was sentenced to death. But Brutus, the captain, was acting as both the judge and the prosecutor, which is a bit of a conflict of interest. So that's kind of contrary to one way that the Pirate Code is contrary to our system, where that's a very separate job. And also, there was no jury. Brutus kind of singly convicted Jod of the crime, and so that's also contrary to our Constitution, where you have a right to a jury to convict you of any crimes. Also, we observe that Jod doesn't have a lawyer. He's his own advocate. So that would violate under our Constitution the right to representation when you're accused of a crime. And then finally, there's this really interesting concept of equal time to present your defense, because Brutus examined the evidence, then convicted Jod, and then they're like, oh wait, but he has a right to an appeal and he has equal time, which sort of overlaps with an appeal, but we don't, I mean, correct me if I'm wrong, Judge, but I mean, certainly there's limits based on refereeing how long someone can go on with their defense, but we don't limit the amount of time necessarily to the exact moment that the prosecution takes to present their case, right?
You know, we can limit the presentation and perhaps the examination of the witnesses. That's in the code. Right. But in terms of everything else, no, it's wide open.
You don't have like a cool plasma hourglass counting down the moments. That'd be rad. It's giving Wizard of Oz. It's very cool. I love it. So, but that's kind of contrary to our criminal proceedings. But then we get to the appeal, where they're like, okay, now you get to challenge your sentence. But this is really interesting because he gets to talk. He's generally in our system, when there's a decision by a judge you don't like, you go to another court with different judges that have supervisory authority over that original court to present your appeal to convince the upper court that the lower court was wrong. But here, Jod is just talking to the same judge. Like that's not an appeal. We would think of that more as like a motion to reconsider or something like that, where you try to convince the judge that they got something wrong. So that's kind of different from our system. Also, what struck me was that this was an automatic right to appeal, which is actually one of the ways in which our system is consistent with the Pirate Code, because when there's a conviction of a capital offense, in the states that do that, you often get an appeal directly to the state of the state Supreme Court just to review that sentence. So that's actually one way in which the system was the same, and that's different from a discretionary appeal where you have to petition the appellate court to hear your case. And lastly, I'll just note that his appeal is peculiar in the way that he's raising new arguments on his appeal as opposed to just arguing about why Brutus got it wrong in the first place, and that's where he presents his shanty defense. But that's really contrary to how we think about appellate courts. But I was really excited to see the Pirate Code in action and see a trial and an appeal. It was great.
Thank you, Stephen. Katrina, let's talk about the Bad Batch.
Let us.
Yay.
So we're going to go back to, I think it's season 2, episode 1 and 2 for Spoils of War and Ruins of War. So that's when they are sent out to obtain Dooku's war chest. And they're promised freedom from all of their debts if they succeed, because it's such a massive collection of loot. And then I think it's not until Ruins of War, the second episode, that we learn where this war chest came from and how he actually obtained it. And it was from the exploitation of his people in his quest for power, and ultimately it destroyed the city. So there's kind of a question that's been going around here, is like, can one loot? And the question is alluded to, I think, a few episodes prior. I don't remember which one exactly, but
alluded to. Sorry,
Alluded
I
to.
see what you did.
Because Omega asked if they are stealing some loot they are intending on taking. And I think the Bad Batch says to her that they're merely intercepting it, right? So it's a question of, can you steal stolen goods? So you certainly can, based on the definition of robbery that we've been talking about before, but possession of stolen property itself is a separate crime from the actual theft of taking it. So in California, it's Penal Code Section 496, and this is what we call a wobbler of an offense, meaning it can be charged as either a misdemeanor or a felony. And you can be charged with possession of stolen property if you knowingly possess stolen property. And in criminal law, it's always fun. It's if you knew or should have known. So even if you didn't know, if you should have known, you'll get that mens rea. That can be avoided if there's no obvious evidence that it was stolen. So say you buy something and you just had no idea, it seemed legit, but there's no evidence you can get around that mens rea. And then, if you possess it, so if you received it, you bought it, you concealed it, or withheld it, then you can be on the hook for possession of stolen property as well. So there's no doubt they're probably on the hook for that, because they know what they are doing. That intention is there. One of the main hints here may be the name of the Bad Batch's ship, which is Marauder. And that is defined as a raider in search of plunder. So that gives us a pretty good indication of what the answer here might be. This is kind of like a legal/moral question, right? Like, can the good guys be pirates? For sure. We've given you the definition of privacy a good amount of times today, but it's the act of robbery or criminal violence or plunder committed for private ends by a crew against another ship. So you have to board a ship, check. You seize control by force, check. And then you attack the ship or other members, check, right? So they've got all of those elements met. We've been talking about the section of the Constitution that gives Congress the power to define and punish robbery. So that's where that definition comes from. But we do have a kind of interesting case. There's not that too many cases where there's charges of piracy, but there's a case, United States versus Hassan, 747 F sub, I think it's up there, or it was. Anyways, I can also give you that site later if you'd like it. But in that situation, it was a kind of a normal Somali pirate situation, and it was a United States Navy vessel, and it was actually going undercover as a merchant vessel. So the pirates mistook it, the military vessel, for a merchant ship, and decided that they were going to try and take it over. So they opened fire on the crew. They tried to get the crew to surrender for a ransom, like you do in a typical piracy situation. But unfortunately, yes, it was a U.S. military ship, so that wasn't going to go down too well. The crew, or the pirates there, the attorneys on behalf of the pirates, moved for dismissal under 1651 that we've been talking about, and they argued that the facts in the indictment were insufficient to establish the crime of piracy. But the judge here, this is a 2010 case, concluded, and I think one of the main points they were trying to make is like, we just shot at it, we didn't actually get to steal anything from it, which was true, right? There was no robbery, because that was never, what were they going to rob? And they were certainly going to end a lot differently before that. It's a miracle they're alive, to be honest. But the judge concluded that we need to define piracy according to contemporary, customary international law, which can change over time, so kind of modernizing the statute and the definition such that actual robbery was not required and they could be charged with piracy just for shooting at the wrong ship. So again, don't touch our ships.
Yes.
Right.
And for our AV tech, the projector just went off, but we're going to proceed anyway because that's how we roll while they try to fix that. Let's talk about young Jedi adventures. And Stephen, let's talk about that. Can a prince be a pirate?
Yeah. Cyrus Vundir is one of the characters on Young Jedi Adventures, and he cosplays as a pirate. His name is Tabor Van Dorn. And so while he's in his costume, he does commit a few crimes. He steals things and raids a cafe and stuff. So this the Young Jedi Adventures actually raises the issue of child pirates, which I don't want to spend a ton of time on because it's a little, it gets into kind of child soldier territory, which is kind of bleak and not great to talk about. But I will say that it's a very undefined area of international law. First, piracy, as we were talking about, is a crime of general jurisdiction. So any state or any country in the world can prosecute a pirate that they apprehend. So while there's an international criminal court in The Hague, there's no international juvie court. That's not a thing. The International Criminal Court only has jurisdiction of people over the age of 18. So that leaves children who are conscripted into piracy kind of at the mercy of whatever country they're apprehended by. And there is a UN Convention on the Rights of the Child, the CRC, which does obligate member states to apply human rights to children, including focusing on the well-being of the child as opposed to punishment when children are in criminal proceedings, but that doesn't really have much teeth, and there's no uniform minimum age of criminal responsibility in international law. So while here in California we think of people who are 14 and under as not being capable of being kind of adult criminals, they're diverted into juvenile justice system. In many countries around the world, that age is much younger. So you wind up with kind of kids in the criminal justice system. And of course, in piracy hotspots like Somalia, they're not necessarily the greatest on the record for human rights, so there's very minimal procedural protections for children who are kind of apprehended and prosecuted as pirates in that part of the world. So I guess I will just say that, obviously don't be a delinquent if you're a minor. But if you're going to be a delinquent, don't do it on the ocean. Stay on land is my free legal advice for the day.
And with that, just to unpack that, there could be a weird sovereign immunity issue with him.
Yeah. I mean, he is a prince, so if he's doing all these kind of crimes, is he even prosecutable as a prince? I mean, there's a little bit of recent jurisprudence in the U.S. Supreme Court about whether you can be convicted as a criminal when you're sort of the leader of a country, but that's sort of a interesting question that probably worth unpacking at some point. Yeah.
Yeah, so there's a lot there. And with that, let's, last topic, and then we'll have some questions on privateers. So, on the final point of privateers, we have people who look like good guys who are privateers. Han Solo, Axe Wolves from Mandalorian Season 3. They have a ship, they fly around, and they're like the A-team that if you have a problem and you can find them and you can afford them, you can hire them. And is that okay? Well, remember when we started our country and we said we have our 6-ship navy, and the Brits have an 800-ship navy, we had to make up a gap. We had privateers then. Like we've done it in the War of 1812. We haven't done it recently, but even during World War II, you had private boat owners going out to do submarine patrols and being able to help keep an eye out for threats to the nation. Or if you look at Great Britain, Dunkirk is a great example of everyone rallying and working together. Those could be considered privateers or really, really, really good people who decided, no, we're not going to let the Nazis win. But I'm old-fashioned that way. So, yeah, good guys can be privateers. They can also be bad guys. But with that, we have 7 minutes for questions. Nothing should be considered legal advice. Don't go out and steal a ship.
Don't be delinquents.
Please.
Don't be delinquents. Yes, sir.
Is it legal to name the beneficiary of your will as the winner of a wacky contest? Like it's a mad world?
Wow, that is a real strong deep cut. I don't know how long you thought about it's a mad world. I'm flashing back. I would think there is a specificity problem with that in your will because it's contingent upon someone winning a contest. I think that could make it void. Do any of you have any thoughts on, we're going down a 1960s rabbit hole I did not foresee.
There's a remake though with
know-
Mr. Bean.
Really?
Yeah.
Okay. Again, I do adore that film, but it's been a while.
There's a degree of specificity to that.
There is,
You know?
but is it guaranteed the competition's going to happen?
That's true, and if the competition's going to go on for, you don't have a set end
Yeah,
for it,
end
then you've
point.
got a rule against perpetuity's problem.
Oh, gosh.
Yeah, and so life will be in plus 7 years, so yeah, that one's they're complicated. Wow, thank you.
Good question.
For my question, wouldn't the executor of the will be the one responsible for making sure the competition happens? But that's a separate thing. That wasn't my actual question. I just thought of it right now. In what we see with Skeleton Crew and Bad Batch and everything, would there be some mitigating factors if the people who were being charged with piracy were not given a lot of the are kind of forced into these situations not by choice, but by circumstances and whatnot. So would there be some mitigating factors for some of them?
So there's the concept of impressment of sailors, which is a good way to start a war. And it has. So the issue is, what did you do after you joined that ship? And there was the Confederate warship Shenandoah that was a raider that was built in England and then decided to go out and terrorize the high seas. And as they were going after United States ships and capturing them and starting to impress some sailors into service for the Confederacy, the issue then was they didn't know the Civil War was over. And they continued raiding. And then they had a nasty surprise realizing, oh darn, we're actually pirates now. Does that mean everyone gets hung? And the answer was yes. All of them could get hung, which is why they wanted to make a run for Great Britain. So, anyway, good book, Last Flag Down, that gets into that. Yes, sir.
Comment and question. So my wife and I were both huge fans of Legal Geeks. We did not see you guys on the schedule.
Okay.
So we, just by chance, we ended up in here. We're like, oh my God,
Oh,
this is
yay.
great. You guys are great to do. What else are you guys doing during
Just this one.
Yeah.
just this one?
Just this one. We will be pitching San Diego Comic-Con. Some of us are going to Japan for our celebration, so you can see us there. We are not presenting, but we will be there. And there are some of the smaller shows we'll in for Fan Expo San Francisco, and we're also looking at Baycon and over the 4th of July weekend. Other questions? It's good to have hands. Thank you. Yes, sir.
For treasure troves, who would have a superior claim of interest in a treasure trove that's found? Someone who found it, or the issue its successors and assigned of the original owner?
Katrina, you want to handle that?
So I think it'd be finders keepers on that one, as it was in original English and common law. Passing it down to heirs and assigns is more for the real property, although it can apply to the personal property, but for that specific circumstance of the coins and currency, it has that little special rule because the English crown wanted to be able to take all the things that were not theirs.
And with that,
Good
for our
question.
last question, we'll hang out outside. There are great panels in here throughout the rest of the day. Thank you all and have a wonderful con.
Thank you.